All right, everyone, we're going to start. I just want some confirmation that I can be seen and heard.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're good.
All right, thank you. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. There you go. Okay, so let's start with housekeeping. Any questions from last week? As far as the homework or software or anything? No? Okay, just let me know if you have any questions. I'll be happy to help, okay? I just want to give a few reminders, just again, just kind of as far as class and everything. Try to do the lab as soon as possible. Usually people who wait till the last minute end up not getting good grades. That's just from experience. So don't wait till Friday night to do it. You know, you end up rushing and, you know, I will say this though, if you have to wait till Friday night, don't rush. You know, it's better to do, you know, go overtime. You're gonna get a 10% reduction, but do it well, and then you get only a 10% reduction. If you rush, usually you just end up getting a bad grade, like end up getting nothing. So, all right, next week is your quiz. So those are the topics that we've gone over and that we will go over today. So check it out. Okay. You have all your recordings on eCampus. Check that out if you need to review for your quiz. We do have a review session with our lab manager, Chelsea, on Wednesday at 12 to 2. Check that out. It's a nice way to recap all the things that we've talked about. And if you have any questions that, you know, you feel like you need to ask, you know, you can do a review session. Obviously, you can ask me as well. So all of that. We have all these resources for you so you can get a good grade. So take advantage of it. All right, so today we're doing human impacts on the environment based on chapter 16 of our book. Kind of chapter 16 of our book, not everything, but a bunch of stuff is from chapter 16. All right, so I'm going to start by showing you here a picture. Okay. And in this picture is clearly a food chain. You intuitively should know what a food chain is if you haven't done this in class already, but you have the mayfly eating whatever stuff that they're finding in here, and this chemical patch or, you know, oil or whatever it is that's here. Okay. Then the bluegill eats some mayfly, and then the bass eats the bluegill, and then you go to the fish, to the river, and catch the fish. Okay. Pretty straightforward food chain. We're all familiar with that. So here's our first question for today. Who do you think in this food chain, who do you think will have the highest concentration of toxins in their tissues?
The human.
The human.
Yeah, pretty straightforward, and you know that we kind of know why, right? And we're going to talk about that in more detail, but just from kind of experience and intuition, you kind of know why. All right. So I want to introduce two subjects here: bioaccumulation and biomagnification. Okay. A lot of people confuse these two things, so I'm going to try to go slow and kind of explain what these are. In fact, I went on YouTube and I was kind of watching some videos on these two things, and even the videos confused these two things. So I was sure to leave my comment on the video to clarify it. A little Karen moment that I had going on there, but it had to be done. Okay, so I'm going to spend some time to explain what these two things are. All right, let's start with bioaccumulation. Okay, so the first one is bioaccumulation is the gradual buildup of chemical compounds in a single individual organism. Okay, so key here, bioaccumulation is happening in one individual. And it could be me, could be a fish, could be a deer. You know, this is happening in one deer or one fish or me. Okay. So let's use fish, for example. We're going to be using a lot of fish examples here. Okay. So look at this picture here. Okay. So we've got a bunch of toxins from this plant, and it's going to settle in the water, and rain is going to push everything in the water. Everything ends up in the water anyways. You know, that's just how life is, right? So they go to the bottom of the water, and then the fish, you see this fish over here, so, kind of picking the sediment, and no doubt they will ingest some of this bad stuff, whatever toxins are in this cloud of stuff going into the water, okay? So what happens is you keep eating this stuff, and you come on Monday and you eat some stuff, you come on Tuesday and you eat some stuff, and you come on Wednesday and you eat some stuff. And sure, you're gonna get rid of stuff, but most of the time what happens is because of the very nature of these toxins, we take them in more than we get rid of them. And so they start to build up in our systems, okay? Or they start to accumulate in our system. So look at this fish. We'll start from day 0. You can see the level of mercury is just about here, just a little bit of mercury. Well, go down to day 90 and see it's almost full of mercury, right? Because they just kept eating and accumulating all that bad stuff, okay? That is bioaccumulation. Again, key concept here is that it happens in one fish, one individual. If you just track that one individual through time, you're going to notice an accumulation of toxins in their system. Now let's compare that with biological magnification, okay? This is the increase in concentration as you move from one tropic level to the next, or it's a fancy way of saying as you move up the food chain, okay? So this is cutting across all the different parts of the food chain, okay? The higher the organism in the food chain, the higher the concentration of the chemicals. So how does this work exactly? Okay, so let's go back to this example. You've got this mayfly here. Let's say in this oil or this chemical, whatever that is, right? Let's say we have 1 parts per million of chemical X, okay? That's bad. We're gonna assume chemical X is bad for you. And each bite or each meal that the mayfly eats, they're going to consume 1 parts per million. We're oversimplifying everything here just to make our points, okay? So here, this mayfly has 1 parts per million, okay? Now what happens is the bluegill goes for lunch or for dinner and decides to have some mayfly, okay? And usually you don't eat 1 mayfly, you eat a bunch of mayflies. So let's say you eat 3 mayfly. That means the bluegill will have a total of 3 parts per million, okay? And this is because, based on the way the energy flows from one part of the food chain up above, you have to eat a lot of stuff, right, to get the energy you need, because you end up wasting a lot. So you eat 3 mayflies and you get 3 parts per million of bad stuff, right? And of course, this bass comes along and the bass is hungry for dinner, and, the bass decides to eat bluegill, as basses do, right? And then instead of eating just 1 bluegill, the bass decides to eat 2 bluegills, so the bass will get 6 parts per million in his system or her system, okay? And of course, you go to the pond to fish, and nobody goes to the pond and spend all that money on, worm and fishing poles and stuff. I'm not a fisherman, so I don't really know all the terminology. But you don't go to the pond and catch 1 fish, right? You catch a bunch, right? So let's say you catch 5 fishes, 5 basses, okay? Depending on what your fishing license will allow, okay? And let's say out of just sheer greed, you eat all 5, okay? Now you're stuck with 30 parts per million, okay? So as you can see, as you go up the food chain, the concentration, even though you started with 1 down here, the concentration just continues to increase until you get to the top of the food chain, okay? We call that biomagnification. You're magnifying the amount of toxins that you're ingesting just as you go up the food chain, okay? So again, I just want to clarify the difference here between bioaccumulation and biomagnification. Bioaccumulation happens with 1 individual, 1 species. You just got to follow it through time, right? And you see the toxin is starting to accumulate, okay? But biomagnification happens across different species, through the food chain. As one continues to eat the other, they continue to increase the amount of the toxin in their system. So just kind of make sure you understand what's going on there. Okay, it's very easy to confuse. You will likely see this in your next quiz, so make sure you pay attention to it. I'm going to show you the slide. I'm not going to really talk about it, but I want to put it up here so that for those of you who will watch this video later, you can just pause it and kind of review everything we talked about. But no comment here. I've said all I have to say about this subject. Okay. Now let me test your understanding, just a practical real-world application of why this is important. Let's say this guy here, let's say this guy's name is Johnny, okay? Let's say Johnny was catching fish for his pregnant wife for dinner. Which of these two fish should he catch? What will be the reasonable fish to catch of, just being practical and being responsible? Which of these two fish would you recommend that Johnny caught for his wife? Okay, well, we got it. Well, there's clearly a consensus, but no one's saying why. There's clearly a consensus of we're all going with the bluegill, but no one's saying why. So someone justify your answer. Okay, it's got less concentration of stuff. Okay, makes sense. Okay, I agree. Okay, all right. So obviously, for the reasons we mentioned earlier, right, you're going to have less stuff in the bluegill than you have in the bass. So it's better to eat bluegill than it is to eat bass. But you know how nature works. Bass is probably more delicious. So, you pick your poison. Okay. But just kind of keep that in mind, right? When we talk about what we consume and why we are prohibited or encouraged against consuming certain things, it's because of this concept of biomagnification. Okay. Let's move on to the next stuff. The next thing we're going to talk about today is the greenhouse effect. What is the greenhouse effect? What have you heard? Someone yell something out. Again, let's not use the chat box if we can help it. What is the greenhouse effect? I want a full-fleshed answer. Well, it doesn't have to be full-fleshed, but give me more than a 2-word answer.
Isn't it like the UVs or something like that from the sun, they get trapped inside the ozone layer?
Okay, very nice. Any other thoughts?
The UV light comes in through and then goes back out, but the heat stays in, kind of like glass does.
Okay, very nice. Anything else? Okay, good. Okay, good. So we have the foundation there, right? We sort of have the idea here. So I'll show you a picture here, just kind of to reiterate what some of you have said, right? We've got a bunch of energy coming from the sun. Okay, got a bunch of energy coming from the sun, and within that energy, you've got a spectrum of stuff, coming in. UV actually doesn't come in, right? The ozone prevents the UV from coming in, which is good, right? So it kind of balances out, okay? But a whole bunch of other things go in to the earth, okay? And of course, they hit the earth and they are reflected back, okay? And some of them actually go back out into space, but a lot of it gets trapped in because of some gases that they interact with in the atmosphere called greenhouse gases. What greenhouse gases do you know? Give me some examples of greenhouse gases.
Carbon dioxide?
Carbon dioxide, yeah, that's the one we all talk about. Any other examples? Sulfur dioxide, okay. Well, the sulfur dioxide actually, let me think about that one. Okay, what are the common ones? Carbon dioxide is definitely one of the more common ones. Any other super common ones, you know? There's one I really want you to say, but maybe I'm just overthinking it. Methane, there you go. Someone said methane. Okay, good. So so there's a bunch of them, but you know, we think about carbon dioxide and methane as, you know, some of the more common ones that we worry about, especially carbon dioxide, and I'll tell you why here shortly. Okay, so let's go back to greenhouse gases and why it works, right? So you got this energy coming in from the sun, okay? And some of it definitely cuts in through the atmosphere, right? And then some of it tries to go back out, but they get stuck. They get stuck because of these greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, right? And they're just kind of, you know, trapped in. So let me ask you a question here. And I want you to think about this before you answer. Are greenhouse gases a bad thing? And then obviously justify your answer. Are greenhouse gases a bad thing? Hard question, huh? I've got no. Plants need them, some of them, to be able to feed. What do you mean? Do plants feed on greenhouse gases? Any other comments? I don't know. I'm not saying that is wrong. I'm not saying that's wrong, by the way. I just kind of like engaging you. Okay, I've got a bunch of answers here. Okay. Again, guys, let's try not to use the chat box. It kind of slows me down because I have to read all your sentences and decipher what you mean. Okay, so okay, so that's a little bit of a trick question. Okay, it's a little bit of a trick question. They're good, okay, because they keep things warm. And you need things to be a certain degree of warm to have plants to grow and trees to grow. So that kind of goes into what some of you talked about with your plants, I'm assuming. So, but if you have too many greenhouse gases, then they make things too warm. And obviously, if things are too warm, that's not a good thing, right? So the idea here is we do need some greenhouse gases, right? But we just don't want too many of those greenhouse gases. And that's the problem we're having, is that these days we're releasing too many of those greenhouse gases. So we're trapping a lot of the heat. A lot of the heat that we're supposed to, you know, let me rephrase that. It used to be, if we had just a few greenhouse gases, we trap just enough heat to keep things balanced, right? Now we're having too many greenhouse gases. We're creating or generating too much heat, right? So let's talk about carbon dioxide, which is one of the greenhouse gases that we worry about, okay? The problem with carbon dioxide that we've noticed is that as you increase the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, you also tend to increase the temperature, basically what we talked about in the previous slide, right? So that's why carbon dioxide is one of the things that we worry about when we talk about climate change and global warming and things like that, okay? But it's important to know here that temperatures fluctuate for a variety of different reasons, and that's fine. We can deal with that. Carbon dioxide, methane, and some of these other gases tend to be a little bit more stable. But what we've noticed, especially carbon dioxide, is that it has been increasing for, you know, for some time, and right now we have the highest levels that it's been for thousands, actually hundreds of thousands of years, which is very problematic. It's very problematic. So here's a question. This one's a little bit of a hard question, but I want you to kind of think about it and try to take a stab at it. How do we know what carbon dioxide levels were hundreds of thousands of years ago?
Ice samples, the certificate.
Very good, very good. We have ice samples, okay, that we get, and we analyze those ice samples. So let me just kind of expand more on that, right? But when you get ice, you have air bubbles stuck in those ice, okay, and obviously you get your air bubbles from the air around, right? And so your air bubbles fall with the gets trapped in the snowflakes and stuff like that. And they fall to the ground, and sometimes they get stuck there. And if you don't disturb it, they just stay there, right? So if you can get a piece of ice from a few 100,000 years ago, okay, and you analyze the air bubbles that were trapped in that piece of ice, then it's possible that you can sort of surmise what the air was like a few 100,000 years ago. Right. Of course, you have to go to a place where the ice just doesn't melt and change every year. Right. You have to go to a place where the weather's pretty stable. It's just cold. Things don't change. Right. And there are different places like that in the Arctic and around the world. Okay. So this is just a nice little summary. This is not an exhaustive list, but it's a little summary of the content of air. Right. So let's say you open up a piece of ice and analyze the air bubble, okay? And you notice, let's look at carbon dioxide. This is what carbon dioxide levels should be, right? So if I take a piece of ice from like 200,000 years ago and I open it and I see that the carbon dioxide levels are lower in that sample, then it follows that carbon dioxide levels were lower in the air just around the world back then, right? Of course, now these days we can just directly measure the carbon dioxide in the air, but we can also measure or come to a fairly reliable conclusion as to what carbon dioxide was doing back in the day. Okay, in 2013, levels of CO2 were 400 parts per million for the first time in recorded history. It used to be, we're talking about way back when, hundreds of thousands of years ago, used to be about 200, so we've doubled it. Okay, and remember what we said, you increase the number of carbon dioxide in the air, you increase the temperature. Okay, and by the way, this is another way we kind of know how temperatures were in the past. It turns out different levels of temperature create different versions of nitrogen and other gases. So the example I used in my last class, which to be sure is not a great example, but it kind of works, right, is different methods of cooking eggs will give you different types of eggs. So if you want boiled eggs, there's a way to do it. If you want fried eggs, there's a way to do it, right? And it's the same thing with the temperature, right? Different levels of temperature will give you different types of nitrogen. So if you analyze the nitrogen you get in an air sample and you get a certain type of nitrogen, right, then you know what the temperature was based on that type of nitrogen. So that's another way to kind of determine what temperatures were back in the day. Okay. All right. So how about the next one? What about steak? It's pretty much the same thing, right? I guess. Maybe. I'm not really sure. What? I guess it's cooking steak, probably, maybe. Okay. All right. What causes the rise in carbon dioxide levels? Question. What causes the rise in carbon dioxide levels? Why does CO2 go up in the temperature?
It's probably like primarily human factors.
Yeah, very good. So some of the things that we do, we're releasing a bunch of fossil fuels. Okay, and there's a bunch of different ways to release fossil fuels. I mean, just basically anytime you burn anything, right, you're releasing something, right, in the air. So that's as if that's not bad enough. We're also removing the things that remove carbon dioxide from the air. So trees remove carbon dioxide from the air because that's how they breathe, right? So not only are we just pumping a bunch of CO2 in the air, we're also just removing a bunch of trees and for for different reasons, right? Basically, these are the two things we need to stop doing, or at least reduce the intensity in which we do it. Okay. Those are some of the concerns that we have when we're talking about human activities and CO2 levels and climate change and the way we interact with the environment. And those are kind of some of the things that we want you to think about as well. You know, because at some point it becomes very unsustainable, and we all get to pay the price for it if we're not already doing so. Okay, any questions there? No questions? Okay, well, like I said, you know, your stuff is due Friday night. Okay, this is all you have. Make sure you do your metric measurements. We did not do that in class today. We didn't talk about that, but it's going to be part of what to do Friday night, okay? And obviously lab 3 is what we talked about, okay? Biomagnification, data graphing, carbon dioxide, fossil fuels, etc., okay? Let me know, do them as soon as possible, but definitely get it done before Friday night. All right, everybody, good luck.